it's on a picture of it on our website, but it's stands up vertically, and it's got a screen assembly that rotates out. And in the screen assembly is a 5-inch CRT with an 8-inch magnifier on it. And now this is a part of a master-slave situation. It's the slave. It has only 5 tubes in it. I haven't seen the schematic yet, but I think it's most likely the tubes are the power supply for the CRT and the horizontal and vertical deflection, and maybe a video amplifier. And it was fed by coaxial cables from a master. It was designed to have. It was the one place it was displayed, apparently, is in the department store in New York in 1939, where they had a number of these on the store floor, and they were all fed by one master studio and one master console. So we're very excited about this. This, as I say, is oh yeah, somebody just put it up there. Really cool looking gadget. Weighs almost 500 pounds. Only one in existence. I think probably the only thing that's rarer than that would be a Farnsworth pre-war set. But anyway, that's coming to the museum. Ought to be here, I would think, within a month, if things go well. And that's about it for the museum's report. Membership continues to climb. I think we're at 198 now. So it's very likely we're going to hit 200. In fact, almost certain we're going to hit more than 200 by the end of the year. This is way up from last year. I think we were 170 last year, at the end of last year. Let me go ahead into the convention report, and then I'll show you what I wanted to show you in the museum as the last part of it. First of all, let me stop and ask any questions on any of what I've just gone over, or comments.
Yeah, if I may.
Yes.
The unit you just described, it's a projection TV, basically?
No, it has a 5 BP4 in it.
Yeah.
And a magnifying lens.
Oh, so you look at it directly.
Yeah, right.
Is it NTSC?
Well, it's anything, because all it has is I think it's most likely pre-NTSC. Probably one of the 400 and some line standards that existed before NTSC. So it's probably 400, 441 lines or something like that. 60 frames per second.
Can it actually display an image in its current condition?
Well, with only 5 tubes, can't imagine it wouldn't be too difficult to get it working.
And so the 5 tubes aren't weird. I mean, 6v6s or something.
They are, 2 of them are 879 rectifiers, which I think are high voltage rectifiers.
Yeah. For
the deflection and for the CRT.
Yeah.
And I can't remember what the others are, but they're like one of them is a 57. So so they're standard radio tubes.
Yeah. Oh, so they're not weird.
Not weird. No.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions, comments?
Well, excuse me.
Go ahead.
Okay, this is interesting. I apologize. Can the museum actually create an image electronically that would actually show on this unit that we just discussed?
Easily.
You can.
Sure.
And is it just video, or does it also include sound?
That I don't know. I don't see any evidence of sound.
Oh, okay.
But we'll have to wait to see what's actually in this box.
Okay. I'm sorry.
There may be a speaker. There may be a speaker. There's no tube for it, I don't think.
Oh.
But there may be a speaker that was fed by wire.
Okay. Okay. I'm sorry. Bye.
Problem.
What year was it manufactured?
1939.
Whoa, that's old.
Very old. Yeah. They made a whole line of TV sets. I can't imagine they made many, but
It's
there's,
definitely a very, very unique looking set.
yeah, absolutely. It's unique.
Did I read somewhere that the alleged purpose of that was to show advertisements in stores?
That's correct.
I thought that in 1939 they couldn't run the advertisements from a VCR. They probably didn't even have a camera, and there really weren't that many advertisements being broadcast. I'm just wondering what that plan would have been. It struck me as kind of strange.
My guess is that the department store put in a simple studio with a single camera and did their own ads of merchandise they had for sale.
A camera would have been stratospherically expensive.
Well, I'm not sure. Depends upon what you mean by that. I think it would have been affordable for a department store or maybe a department store chain to do that. But they had to have some source of video for if they were running advertising.
A mystery.
Yes, a mystery.
Okay, so this thing predates the assignment of the frequency bands for commercial television. It's just a thing that takes a video signal from somewhere and shows
Yes.
400 line. That's all it does.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm. Any more questions or comments? Well, then let's move on to the convention. As I mentioned before, it went very well. We had glitches with the caterer again, but our great volunteers dealt with it. We got the convention survey. We sent a survey out. There were 96 attendees, which is down a little bit from last year. We got 26 respondents to our questionnaire, and the response was overwhelmingly positive, with the usual complaints about this and that. But the big disappointment was the auction. There were no high-end items in it. The live auction didn't last it was less than an hour. There's some nice things, but nothing. I think the highest priced item that sold was $300 or $400. Compared to last year, we had 3 multi-thousand-dollar items in it. And this is the first year that's happened. Every year we've had a fairly decent turnout. We had one collector who has a big collection who said he was going to show up to put things in and didn't. So I don't know what caused it, but that was sort of the downer for the convention. The swap meet was well received. What was really well received was the presentations. We got Universal. I think out of a scale of 0 to 5, the average response for the presentations was 4.9. So people really, really liked them. And it's something we need to work on for next year to have more. And there were comments that people wanted more of them. We had been cutting back on them because they're difficult to arrange and people were going overtime and it was crowding the schedule. So I think we ought to look at going back to more of them in the future. The other thing that's been declining every year is the Saturday dinner. I think we only had 28 attendees. We used to have 60 or more a few years ago. And I suspect that's an economic thing. It's an extra 45 or $50. And people are, one of the comments we got was that motel rooms are outrageous now. And it makes it tough for people to come and spend more than a day. So we had a lot of people that showed up just for Saturday. And I think that reduces when they have to spend money, $150 on a motel room that used to be 60. They don't have the income to, to spend it on the dinner. So we need to do a lot of thinking about what we do next year. The board is planning on a meeting fairly soon to talk about the convention and some other things. That's really all there is to say about the convention. Any comments or questions? Anybody here that was at the convention that would like to comment on it?
It was fun.
Good, good.
I'll try and come next year.
Oh, good, good. I'm glad to have you. Are you the person that bid at the auction and won the 2 little sets?
Yes.
Fantastic. We're
They're
glad
very
to see
nice.
you. Very glad. Did they work?
Yeah, they both work.
Good. That's good news. Okay. Any other comments?
What
I
were
re-
those two sets? I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
What were those 2 sets just mentioned that worked? What were they?
I could show them. I could show them. Hold on.
Oh, on your thing? Oh, okay.
Yeah. All right. Sorry, my room's a mess.
You could
This one,
yeah.
Magnavox 9-inch color set from 1978, I believe. I play Tetris on this thing a lot. Only problem is that this knob is a little bit loose and it fell out a few times, but it's fine.
Oh,
And then this one, Panasonic Bisider.
What?
Let me.
What is that?
It's
Oh, it's a portable TV.
yeah, it's a clock, a TV, and a radio.
Oh. Is it like 5 inches diameter?
No, I think it's more like maybe like 3.5, because this is a 3.5 set and they're kind of similar size. This is a 5-inch set.
Oh, okay. So that was something you'd bring to like a picnic?
Possibly.
So it has batteries in it?
I'm not sure. Usually I don't use like batteries inside of the TVs. I think you're meant to like have it on your nightstand or something.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't use batteries with the TVs because like 1, they could corrode, and 2, they just don't last long.
They will. Okay, no, thank you. I'll disappear.
You don't need to.
I think it's wonderful that you're so enthusiastic about that. That's really heartwarming.
Yeah.
Steve, I just had a stupid comment. I was just gonna mention when I came to the very first early television convention,
Yeah.
I spent $16 a night on the motel.
Wow.
I
It's
said,
10
boy,
times that much now.
yeah, we're not in Kansas anymore. We're in Hilliard.
Right. Yep.
But
I had a hard time getting a hotel room actually because apparently the university has graduation that same weekend, and my usual hotel couldn't accommodate me on Saturday night, so I ended up at what turned out to be a better one, but it was expensive. But they both were, so it's just the way it is.
And that's the other problem, is avoiding events. It's impossible now. There's so much going on in Columbus that any weekend you pick, there's going to be something big going on.
Well, Hilliard seemed to be really jumping. I mean, there was a street fair next to our where our lunch was, and there was something else going on down the street, right down where Franklin Street meets Main or whatever it is. I mean, there was stuff going on all over the place. So on top of
Hilliard has completely changed. I moved there in 1978, and at that time it was really a hick town. We had problems with when our son went to elementary school. A kid wore a Nazi shirt to school, and that was okay.
Oh.
That was okay back then in Hilliard.
Oh yeah, back when the idea that being politically correct didn't exist.
Well, the idea that you need to care about history and the bad stuff that people have done.
Oh yeah,
The,
that too.
And Hilliard now is, I think, probably tripled or quadrupled in population, and the demographics has changed dramatically. And as a result, the city council has changed dramatically. They used to be just good old boys that were, I think, if some of them were corrupt. Don't know if that for fact, but it's my guess. And this new group is just really intent on making this a community. And you see that in the renovation of these of the space next to us. And frankly, I think that's one of the reasons they'd like to see us in a new facility. Is our building is becoming an eyesore as they gradually get rid of old stuff there. That right to the west of us were two rickety houses that were torn down, and a big fancy winery is being built there. And there's us and two or three. There's a insulation company and a lawn company across the street. And then there's a catering, one of these companies that caters to construction sites. And those are the only sort of industrial buildings that are left. And I think this land is, I think they could really use it as part of their development plan. So I think that's one of their motivations for wanting to do something. Yeah, the city has changed a lot.
You know, I'm lucky because I have cousins down there.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't really have to pay for a hotel.
Oh, that is good. That's good.
Well, it's sure changed a lot in the 10 years or so I've been going to the
Yeah.
convention. I mean, it's just amazing how much different
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah, right. Okay, well, if there are no more, oh yeah, I skipped introductions. Is anybody new here that'd like to introduce themselves?
Well, I'm Stephen Moan, but I've been on the site occasionally.
Okay,
I don't
Stephen,
know.
welcome.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Glad that you're here.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Well, then let's go
I'm
to
Dave
the,
Meinhardt from Platteville, Wisconsin.
what's that? I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm Dave Meinhardt from Platteville, Wisconsin. I used to teach broadcasting at the University of Wisconsin, Platteville in Wisconsin here. So,
Oh, great. Glad you're on.
What
Well,
was
let me-
shown? There was
Go
a
ahead.
thing. It was just seconds ago.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
There was just an image of an old TV, it looked like.
oh, that's mine. My
That.
camera's not working.
What is that?
That's a 46 RCA. It was actually designed before the war. So that was one of the first. That's a 7-inch. They also made a 10-inch as well.
621, eh?
What?
We
I
have
have
one of the
to-
we have one of the Sonoff Museum also.
I have to
working.
correct what you just said. The set may have been conceptualized in terms of the style before the war, but it certainly wasn't designed before the war. The technology did not exist to fit in that size cabinet, and was not projected really to exist at that time. It wasn't until after the war that the actual design was done.
Yes, I stand corrected. The aesthetics were there
Yes.
beforehand, but the
Absolutely.
products were not. Thank you.
That's
for clearing that
absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else?
Well, I'll squeak one more time. That set right there now didn't exist really until post-war. I'm just curious, to what extent did the development of radar and the associated cathode ray tubes affect how this thing was eventually marketed or made or designed? Did the war really matter?
Drastically.
It
There were
did.
two developments that made a big difference. Well, three. One of them is, as you mentioned, CRTs and radar.
Yeah.
A second one was VHF communication.
Oh,
Before the war, VHF was the no man's land,
yeah.
and during the war, it was perfected. And as part of that, miniature tubes were developed, because they were required really for VHF to work, because you couldn't use a big bulky tube at those frequencies.
Yeah.
So all of that made the design of sets after the war drastically simpler. And then, of course, as you reduce the size and complexity and the heat generated by the various parts, the power supplies could get smaller and cheaper. So it all sort of came together during the war to make it possible to make a 10-inch set that had a cabinet that wasn't terribly bigger than the picture tube.
If I might say something, one other thing that was developed during the war, which was critical to television, was the image orthicon tube, which was
Yes.
originally developed for a guided glide bomb,
Yes,
RCA.
that's true. Though they
And
were
we have an early one at the Sound-Off Museum.
right. Yeah,
So-
there was a whole series of tubes developed during the war, sort of culminating in the image orthicon, that led from the Iconoscope to the image orthicon, and finally the image orthicon was really the first tube that was practical for a studio camera. All the previous tubes required too much light.
So with that TV just shown post-war, would that be electrostatic deflection then?
No, that particular one is magnetic.
It is.
RCA did not make electrostatic sets, never did. The 7-inch version and the 10-inch both used magnetic deflection CRTs.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, let's move. I'll show you our new area. If I can disconnect myself from this gadget. Let's see, Dave, have you got my video up?
You are up, yes.
Thank you. Let me see if I can see it.
The camera that's facing you is on right now.
Yeah, let me figure out how to switch that. I always have a hard time doing this on the oh, there we go. I found it. There we go.
Right.
Okay. One of the decisions that we made some time ago was to try to create some newness to the museum's display. And one of the things we came up with was to allocate a room as a temporary display area. This room was previously British pre-war sets, which we moved to put several of them in storage and consolidated the others in the room next door. Still have a lot of those sets on display. And the first temporary display is Predictas. Blake Hinkle put this together. And you can see I'm not a Predicta expert, so I can't tell you what is what here. But these are various Predicta models. Stop on this one for a minute. This is the grand prize for the sweepstakes. And here's one more over here. Now, Blake had planned on being here for the convention, and was going to set this room up with signage and some more information. He does have a QR code that takes you to a YouTube channel, but he was going to have more information to put on the walls in here. Unfortunately, he hurt his back, wasn't able to come. And still he was planning on coming down in the next couple of weeks, and he re-injured it. So he still hasn't been able to get down here. But this is going to be our new area that we're going to rotate. We have ideas for future displays, all kinds of ideas, as you can imagine. And one of the other things we'll be able to do with this is to sort of increase the age range that we cover in the museum. For instance, we have almost nothing beyond about 1970. And it would be nice to have, and a lot of people that come in here, they don't see anything they can connect with because, you know, they weren't alive when these sets we have on display were made. So it allows us maybe to have an 80s or 90s display, or maybe a display that takes you from the 70s through flat screen. Another idea is we may do a display of home videotape systems. Bunch of ideas have come up, but that's what we plan on doing in here. We're excited about this, and we get Larry, who's in here every weekend, tells me that this gets a lot of attention. That people are really interested in seeing the Predictas. I'll zoom in again on the grand prize because it's sort of neat. And Dan Jones and Matthew DeSaro and a few others spent hours getting it working. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Predictas, but they are a serviceman's nightmare. They
I've heard. My friend has one.
They're almost impossible to get. Switch my camera back to the other. There we go. I'm back.
He says he has to restore it like once a month. That's how often it breaks.
It's not only that they break down all the time, but they're enormously difficult to repair. The way they're built, they were not designed for easy servicing.
Like the British sports car of televisions.
There you go. That's about right. Or the Italian cars.
Yeah, that's pretty close to right. I worked at a Philco dealer when I was in high school, and these things came in all the time. I mean, I can't tell you how many I took to the town dump because it was going to be $100 to fix one, and we could sell you a new TV for $119 and even throw in a little rolling cart. So, but God, they're horrible to work on. I mean, they're even worse now than they were then.
Yeah.
But they were just miserable to deal with.
What is the specific difficulty of these? They're just electric circuits, tube circuits. What's unusual in the construction that makes them
well,
so difficult?
They're early printed circuit boards.
Oh, they are
tube type and early PC boards, and the heat from the tube, they don't have enough ventilation for a starter, and the heat from the PC boards would make them separate around the tube sockets. And that would start shorting stuff out. They also, the way it was built, the PC boards are built onto a metal pan that stuck up that had tabs that stuck through the PC board and were twisted and then soldered to make a good ground connection. And to get to the bottom of this PC board, you had to take this stuff off. And that was just nuts. And then they had these little pack modules that had resistors and capacitors in them, and they wouldn't tell you what was inside of them now. Now people know, but back then you had to go buy this part from Philco, and the other components, like a capacitor or something on the top of the board, you could just clip the leads at the top and go kludge another capacitor in place. But these little pack things, you had to go to the bottom of the board to get to them, and just getting there was just, it could be horrible, and you could destroy all kinds of stuff with your 200-watt Weller soldering gun. I mean, that really fixed them up too, because those early boards just did not like heat. So, and the picture tubes went bad. Most of them went bad under warranty, which is why you don't see a lot of Philco stuff these days. And changing one, I never changed one personally, but I helped my boss do that. And I learned a whole new vocabulary from the little parts and springs and things like that. I became educated at every cuss word there was, trying to put things back together. It's kind of like taking your watch apart. It comes apart real easy, but putting it back together, good luck.
So basically, the passive components were potted. It sounds like the set was designed for extremely cheap or very efficient production, not so much servicing. Would that be close?
That might be
Why
fair.
would they pot that stuff?
Oh, they were big problem was heat. I mean, that was the big problem. That's what usually took out any component of the thing. But changing the components was a nightmare. And changing the picture tubes was also a nightmare. Plus, it used a 2.3-volt filament, as I recall, on the picture tube, which was not standard. So there wasn't much you could put in its place.
There we go.
Yeah, here's a little package.
There they are. Okay.
Yeah, they were just a whole, I mean, you knew that there's 14 cents worth of components in the thing,
Yep.
but they were extremely, they were $25 in 1963 money, and a lot of people just didn't have these things fixed. That was the bottom line. They just said, "No, I'm sorry, I'll just buy a new TV."
Okay. Wow. Okay. Thanks so much.
To give you an idea of how unreliable there are, all of these sets that I showed you there were restored, completely restored, prior to the convention. And when we hooked them up, only 3 of them worked. They had died in the period of time that it had taken to put them and plug them in. So we had to have our guys come in and go through them and get them going again. And I think they got all but one going.
Yeah, that's pretty typical on these things. We have one that seems to work. It's only at the Texas Broadcast Museum. It's only blown up twice when I've turned it on. I've actually thought about getting a smoke generator out of a Lionel train set and putting it inside the thing with a little button that nobody can see, and I just push it and have a big puff of smoke come out and have it go dark or something. It's theatrics.
Yes. Well, any more questions before I leave you guys?
Yeah, I have a comment, Steve,
Yes.
about that room. You're thinking of changing different exhibits in the room, and one of the things you want. I understand how you want to include sets that are memorable for younger people from the 80s, for example. But I don't know how you would call that early television, sets from the 80s.
Well, earlier than 2020.
Yeah, I thought late television was like where we are now.
You're right.
It's all perspective.
Yep.
Any television with a glass CRT in it is pretty funky looking these days.
Yeah.
Well, 40 years is pretty old. Getting close to retirement.
If you do get 80s TVs, I have a recommendation.
Okay.
Oh, ow. Hold on. Ow. Jeez, I'm stepping on things. Zenith Space Command, or I call it the Zenith Cube, but this one I want to say it's from 1985.
Uh-huh.
You should totally
Okay.
get a set like this if you make an 80s exhibit, because they're really nice.
Well, I tell
Yes.
you what, when we get to that point, we will consult you.
All right. Ow.
I would say anything with a cathode ray tube.
You know, a lot of kids have never seen a TV with a CRT in it. I mean, they really haven't. Why would they? If you're 12 years old, they didn't exist in their lifetime. They have no idea. They think everything comes out of one of these, phones. That's it.
I have an idea for an exhibit. What about Heathkit color televisions?
That is a good idea. I mean, I think the possibilities are endless.
They made a black and white TV, and I went to a garage sale once here, and there was a beautiful Zenith, not Zenith, Heathkit black and white TV, and I didn't buy it because my car was parked about 3 miles away from it. It seemed like I didn't want to carry it there, and I've kicked myself ever since because it was actually amazing TV. But they were doing this back in the 50s even. And Heathkit really resonates with a lot of people because not just
sure
TVs, but a lot of people bought all kinds of Heathkit stuff.
Excuse me, everybody. Hello.
Hello.
This is Katie Madama. How are you? Good. Steve, I have a question. When we had the meeting, I guess 2 months ago, I guess we didn't have one in April. There were some gentlemen at the meeting here, in Zoom, that had been to the 1964 World's Fair.
Right.
Do you remember that?
I remember that. I don't remember who it was.
Oh, okay. Because I promised all the people that wanted autographed pictures that I would send them. So I have them, and I could send them to whoever's in charge of the meeting with stamps, so nobody has to pay for stamps, and then you could mail them out to the members, whoever wanted them. But I don't remember who that was.
Hi there.
Oh, it was you. Yeah, Wayne. Okay, Wayne. Okay. All right. So hold on a minute. Do you remember who the other gentleman was?
Oh.
All right. Well, so I know there was at least one other person. So we'll find out who that is. But in the meantime, what I'll do, Wayne, is I guess, Steve, can I mail them to you in Ohio with stamps?
We can do that. I think it would be easier if you could just maybe post on here for people to contact you directly. On the comments section.
Yeah, I didn't want anybody to feel like they were
right.
I didn't want anybody to feel that if they didn't feel comfortable giving out their address or something. So I didn't know how to handle that. And I thought, so okay.
We can do that. We can do that if you got but I don't I would prefer you do it.
Okay.
We are really tied up with a bunch of stuff. And
no problem. I'm thrilled.
Thing we couldn't handle. Right.
Okay, I'm fine with that. So what would you like me to do? I would be very happy to put my information here in the chat box. I'll be very happy to do that. Bear with me.
I just put my email in the chat.
Oh, I see it. I see it, Wayne. Here's my contact information. So if anybody can email me here, and then I'll be glad to mail them out to you. It was quite an ordeal because they were originally on my father's camera, a 34 millimeter, and then I had them put on videotape and then onto DVD, and I had to shoot it to try to get a snap. I got some pictures though, so I'm very, very happy of the 1964 me swanning about on the stage. I was able to get a still shot, and I'm very happy. And now I'm shutting up so that you gentlemen can carry on your business.
Okay.
But there you go.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Just email me, and I'll make sure that I email you back, and I'll be very happy to send you. I'm very excited to do that. I love it. Thank you so much, Paul.
We appreciate it. Okay, I'm going to drop off now.
Thank you.
Go home, get to sleep. And thank you all for attending, and keep talking as long as you want to. I think the line will be open.
Well, I'll stay on for a while. I love this meeting.
Okay.
Oh, I have another question before you run away, Steve.
Yeah.
Before you run,
Yes.
I have at least one. Do you keep a file of old schematics up there? Like schematics?
Well,
different.
we have complete sets of the Sams and Ryder manuals, and which
Okay.
covers virtually every set.
I think I know that I have at least one schematic, and it's from a 1960 something Heathkit stereo tuner that my father built.
Yeah, I don't think that would be of interest to us, but
I just didn't know whether you kept files in case somebody
no.
called. Do you have something like this?
No, not unless it's television related.
Okay. All righty. Thank you. Have a good night.
Okay. Thank
Always
you,
fun.
everybody.
Always fun.
Bye.
All right. So Wayne, I have got to get you, Wayne. Here we go.
I don't see your email in the chat.
Hold on, Wayne. I am getting you. Hold on.
Okay.
Okay. I am actually 2 down from yours. But oh, I see. It went to Steve as a direct message. Hang on a minute.
Oh.
I was talking and doing that at the same time. Hold on. So let me put that out there. And anybody, whether they were on the meeting, anybody that wants, I had a bunch of them made up because it was so fun. And I will be very happy to send them out. Let me see now. I mean, you know, I'm a TV producer here in New Jersey, and I've hosted 3 TV series. I do voiceover work, so I'm a ham. So when anybody wants a picture or an autograph, to me, it's like better than a bonbon. There you go. Do you see it there now, Wayne?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, now I'm going to be quiet and let everybody else carry on. Thank you. I didn't mean to disturb anybody.
I believe what I have is a 1931 cathode ray tube. And I'm just curious if any of the participants know what this thing is. Oh, great. Nice. And look at this. There's the deflection plates. So this thing came from a
Neck. Sorry.
oh, I'm sorry.
Is this the neck?
Yeah. See, no acceleration voltage, nothing. Well, so that forms the beam diameter right there, I'm sure. And there's the deflection plates. And then notice the phosphor coating. So this was made in about 1931. I have to get my glasses on. And of course it falls down. So this is from a General Radio, excuse me, 515-AR oscilloscope, 1931. So it was called a 535-A. So this is the dead cathode ray tube from one of those. Anybody have any idea what this is? But what fascinates me is this is a good example of how science and engineering intersect. You know, you can hear all you want about capacitors and fringing fields. And if you're going to actually do it for real, you have both of these systems identical in dimension. So anyway, it of course doesn't work. It has a 5-amp filament. Any comments? Or that's backwards. Anyway, okay. Done. All I got. But I wanted to add one comment.
My only comment would be I doubt General Radio made that. Somebody made it for them.
Can you show it again? I was busy copying email information.
Can you possibly back your camera away from it so we can get an idea of what the whole thing looks like? There you go. Yeah, that looks like a CRT now.
You have to admire the ability of whoever blew the glass for that thing. That was
Yeah, I found something online. Is that it?
I think so. I have an old GR catalog. Let me see if I can find it.
Hmm.
well, I'm going to run, folks. I've got 2 dogs and a wife who said you haven't fed us yet, so I think I better go take care of that. So everybody have a good evening.
Here we have a
Good night, Chuck.
1935 GR catalog. Let me see if I can find that scope.
There's a lot of old TV magazines from the 30s and 40s where they take the cathode ray tubes from oscilloscopes and build their own TVs. I got one TV here from 1948, 49. It was built from a 3-inch CRT. That one right there. I probably can't see it. It's a little National Radio Institute kit. So there's a lot of articles using 2-inch, 3-inch, 5-inch, and 7-inch tubes.
If you look at this, page from the GR catalog, it shows their whole range of oscillographs, as they call them. So apparently that was an important part of their product line.
I wonder who made the tubes, Jonathan.
I don't know. I think that there must have been companies that made vacuum tubes for other purposes, and they probably were also able to make CRTs.
Oh, sure.
But it did take some pretty fancy glass blowing to make something like that. And the geometry had to be pretty exact. And in studying the history of electronics, I don't think we give as much credit as we should to the craftsmen particularly glass blowers.
I got this 1-inch CRT at a estate sale just for $1. I don't know what this was used in either. It was a 1-inch CRT.
Come on.
But there's some labels on it. I need to look it up on the internet and see what it's used for.
I might have an idea on that 1-inch. I knew a guy on the East Coast, Mel Dunbrack, that did a lot of home building and early TV hobby projects. And I think he designed in the early, in the 50s and 40s on the ARRL handbooks. There was a modulation monitor that you could put on your dashboard that was using either a 1 or 2-inch CRT. And that would probably fill the bill.
Okay.
What were all TVs mechanical scan in the 30s? What I'm not clear on is here you got this cathode ray tube. What would have prevented the use of this in early TV starting from at least 1931 when this was produced? What happened? Why wasn't that connection made? If it wasn't.
There was a connection and there was some overlap between the early CRT sets and the late mechanical sets. I'm working on a chapter in the book I'm writing about it. The overlap period was mostly in the 30s, and the earlier period was in the mid-20s. When they came out of the lab and went public was 1928, and the early mechanical television went from 1928 to about 1934, a little bit after the death of Charles Jenkins. And then there was a medium definition television period, and a lot of different ideas and combinations of things, some of which were partly mechanical and partly electronic. There was one like that in Italy. And then eventually the CRTs prevailed and into the early 40s, and the standards became more firm from country to country, although not between countries so much.
Yeah, you have to realize that the electronic pickup tubes were much harder to get working than the display tubes. And in fact, the NHK Museum in Tokyo has a reproduction of a early setup which used a scanning disc camera and a CRT monitor.
Well, does that suggest that there may have been a transition period where you might have had a slow scan CRT in concert with mechanical scanning for the image?
Well, on an experimental basis, of course.
Okay.
RCA started out that way. When they went from 60 to 120 lines, they were still using a mechanical scanner for the pickup.
Yeah.
And then the receivers were CRT. Purdue University did research and sold it to RCA after they lost their funding from a Chicago concern. And I think it was Grigsby Grunow or one of those. And so they were doing a lot of research, but Purdue, their receiver was always a CRT. And in the studio, they were scanning film at 60 lines. And so that was their area of pioneering work. And that receiver, I don't know if that's in the museum or not, but that would be a very valuable receiver, handmade in Indiana.
When you say scanning, were they scanning motion picture frames at that
They were
rate?
scanning motion pictures at Purdue. And there were three main educational institutions that were pioneering in educational television. In fact, that was the name of the book from University of Iowa, which was where I went to graduate school.
Yeah.
And they had mechanical equipment that was using the Western television standard from Chicago. Ulysses Sanabria invented that, triply interlaced. And then the other two were Kansas State, and Purdue. And then there was also a trade school in Kansas City, Missouri, that used the Sanabria standard. But the other two, Kansas State and Purdue, were 60 lines, and Sanabria's was 45 lines, but it had the advantage of interlace scanning.
So even interlace scanning was around then.
Oh yeah, interlace scanning. A lot of people think that Sanabria invented it, but he didn't.
Yeah.
It had been around for several years before that. That certainly improved the picture, because flicker was the most irritating thing in those days. And so taking that out of the equation was a huge step forward for Sanabria. The problem would be if they had gone forward with triple interlacing, it would have been hell to reproduce, to edit with videotape. They've had that problem in England with the color subcarrier flipping.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, then I'm just going to ask one more question. If you're going to transmit this over the air, or possibly even coaxially, don't you need a pulse when each frame starts to synchronize the transmitter and receiver, I think? Did they have that? How did they know or did you have to tune it manually to 60 hertz or something?
The earliest mechanical televisions were unsynced, were manually synced by the user, and then they started having sync pulse. They had to sync pulses later.
In the early days, yeah.
It wasn't that hard. That was, in fact, the first remote control. Was a wired remote control that allowed you to change the phasing or the sync.
Okay. Now, did they use? I don't know if this is true. I'm just speculating, but now 60 hertz is consistent phase-wise all over the USA. So in the early days of television, was there a problem with local phasing to 60 hertz such that they needed this mechanical adjustment?
Definitely so, and that was why Sanabria was trying to lobby for connections between the power grid, so we would have consistent 60 hertz.
Yeah,
and you had to be on the same power grid as the station that was transmitting to receive it. But with mechanical television, just above the AM band, which were the frequencies they used from 1929 on, the signals could go much farther than that. You get DX and skip. You could even go out of the country with them. The Iowa City station from my old school, they could receive it in Oklahoma and many different states. General Electric, which was in Schenectady, New York, they were receiving that all the way on the West Coast. So obviously they weren't on the same on the same power system, and so there was they were right back, whether they used synced or not. They were right back, if they were using power line sync anyway. They were right back to manually syncing the picture. But in the early days of television, it was such a thrill to receive a picture and send a QSL card back to the transmitter that that was part of the hobby, was just catching a picture for a few seconds.
Okay.
So it was a totally different situation than watching programs, which came a few years later.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you remind me the television exhibit in the black and white version at the Science Museum in Chicago in the 50s, which was produced by RCA. They had a mechanical system, and they totally cheated on the synchronization by putting the scanning disk and the reproducing disk on opposite ends of the same motor shaft.
Yeah. Good trick. That's
Yeah,
good.
I do something similar. I even go a step further and I use the same disc, the opposite sides, 180 degrees apart. One's for the taking the picture, and the other one is reproducing it. All I have to worry about is the phase, because you have to drill twice as many holes to do that in the disc, and then you move the light box that's giving you the modulated dots, and you move that until you get the phase of the picture right. So you're not chopping the picture in half. That is, you could get the top half on the bottom and the bottom half on the top. Or in my case, I'm scanning it vertically, so it would be the left and right sides could be reversed.
I'm curious.
Pre-war California was 50 hertz versus 60. And back in California, I think before 48, they were 50 hertz.
They had a section of Chicago that was DC. And of course, that didn't work with Sanabria's system either, because he was using power line sync. But the power line sync was rock steady. So everybody said, no, that's wonderful, except for DX. And of course, they were getting QSL cards from all over the place. And Bill Parker, who was one of the engineers, I knew the man. He died in the 1990s. And he had worked on getting the sync perfect all day downtown in Chicago. There were these two stations, W9XAO and W9XAP. And he worked for both. He worked for Western television, but he was an engineer for both, and he designed the equipment at W9XAP. He got home at night, and he turned on the TV to see his handiwork, and the sync was off. The phasing was off, actually. The picture would lock, but it would lock and it would be out of phase, so you'd have a split picture. And it was driving him crazy. And then he realized that he wasn't getting Chicago, he was getting Kansas City, Missouri. The other station I told you about, the First National Bank and their school. So they use the same standards. So, and you couldn't tell. And it was also harder to adjust a Sanabria disc, because there were three possibilities because of the three different spirals of holes, which it was triply interlaced. So you could sync up the disc three different ways, and you had to make sure the phasing was right. There's a long set of instructions in the manual, which I believe is online at ETF, on how to make sure that you have the right spiral of holes at your receiver that corresponds to the spiral of holes at the scanner.
So basically, then you could coordinate the scanning. Then I'm also curious. I'm not sure how to put this, but was there a difference in grade levels between mechanical scanning and electronic scanning? And I'd put that in terms of bit depth. So if it's 8-bit gray levels, that'd be 256 gray levels and so on. How did the gray levels change in terms of image presentation as the industry moved toward electronic systems, if it did at all?
Well, there were lots of things. I think the two biggest ones is to get DX, you would generally want the strongest signal. And that would mean that you would want black and white. So you'd get better delineation. A person could quickly, in a few seconds, could see this before the picture went out of sync. So that's why Jenkins, I believe, is a real reason why Jenkins used a silhouette signal. And the British always make fun of them. They say, we had Grayscale and you didn't. But if you look at Jenkins' fax work, which came before his television work, using the same equipment in many cases, it had all the grays. Well, why would he do that? Well, he said he had to get this. His test engineers, his field engineers, were amateurs. In fact, a lot of the people in the industry were amateurs in those days, were amateur radio people.
Oh,
they made the industry. That's the first difference, jumping from a stable image with gray tones, and also he wanted more bandwidth, which they got when they went to the new TV band at 150 kilohertz, 1.5 megahertz.
I don't think I'm going to want
roughly near the 160 meter ham band. So that was one thing that differed. The other one was they didn't have DC restoration in the earliest sets. They just had capacitor coupling because they've been using that for radio all those years. So your gray tones would vary over the screen. And if you went from one image, a bright person against a dark background, then the opposite in the next shot, everything would get all spooky, and you'd get strange gray tones because the capacitors would average out all the tones. And so they eventually invented DC restoration and direct coupling and so forth.
Okay. So the issue was consistency of gray levels and how they were presented until
right, which also played into color, of course. When color television came along pretty early, it came in the late 20s, and 3D also.
Yep. Thanks.
Sure.
I'll mention that James was talking about the triple interlace system, and my background screen, shows a disk of such a set. This is the old computer in my ham shack that doesn't have a working camera, so that's what I always put up for the early television foundation Zoom meetings. But you can kind of see where there's a discontinuity where it's going from 1/3 of it to another at the upper right, and then another discontinuity down at the lower part. And then for the phasing adjustment, they rotated the whole motor assembly.
Also, that's a lens disc, so that's more advanced than some of the earlier. That was the second model of Sinabri's system, or actually the third, because the first one was a kit.
Yes, it's a model 41, and the sophisticated lens disc.
He actually started out, Clement Wade was the guy that started the company, and he'd made his money off Eskimo pies. And they were associated with, I think it was Reynolds Aluminum. They had a building, a factory, and they offered him space down at Louisville, Kentucky. So he started the company down there, and originally they were going to do stock reports, which is, I believe, why they called it Western Television. It was like Western Union with television, replacing Union. And they actually proposed the system to Western Union, I think hoping for a buyout or something, I would guess. This is just my guess. And Western Union put the kibosh on the whole thing. They said, we're not going to, subsidize or a competitor. We're not going to do this. And that put them out of business. So they moved back to Illinois, and Clement Wade decided he wanted to commercialize television, which is why there's so many Western sets out there, and they're so nice. And the second version, which you have there, is a huge improvement over the original one, with the crater tube and the lens disc. And Bill Parker actually mounted those lenses himself on many of the sets, and he used a drill press bed to do that. And he had the disc, the lenses that they got were imperfect. They weren't all, didn't all have their focal point in exactly the same spot. So he had to rotate the lenses before he staked those lenses down. And some of these discs use glue, but like the ones in Popular Science's article about this, but his were staked in, the way I understand it. And he had to do each one separately and then make the next one. And I don't know if they automated that I probably did when they bought Echophone, and Western bought Echophone. And eventually when it sold, when Wade got out of it, they sold the whole company a few years later. That became Hallicrafters.
No, I don't want to hog this, but the previous image of the scanning disc, it doesn't seem to appear as a spiral organization from the openings. So is that framed by? I thought it was a spiral.
It is a spiral. It's just the perspective is very poor here. It's actually a picture of a set in as found condition that I was overjoyed to find such a set with original patina dirt and dust from years. So it kind of cracked me up to put on that version of photo, but it really is spiraled in.
It is.
It's the upper right corner that is kind of the transition from the outer part of the spiral to the inner part of another spiral.
But you have the 3 spiral disc, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so that would probably have been one of the sets that they were picking up W9XK at University of Iowa on.
Oh, absolutely. And the W9XK story is fascinating. James, I read a lot of your stuff online and very much enjoyed. Didn't know that you had a U of I connection. So.
Thank you. Oh, that's where it all started. 49 years ago.
Nothing wrong with Iowa.
No, absolutely. No, they were on the forefront. They were bragging about being the first television station west of the Mississippi, but there were things that they didn't know about going on in Oregon and California at the time.
But yes, I've certainly read the Kurtz book of Pioneering in Educational Television.
It's an excellent source. Excellent. And it's too bad that more people don't know about it, but I'm glad they don't, because they're hard enough to get anyway.
Yeah, and sadly, even people at U of I don't seem to know about it.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Some of it is that the building, the engineering building where they had the station, and then the later electronic station is all gone, and so is the building, the successor building that where I worked. It had the big studios, the old radio studios that they built, the WPA built for town meetings and television, radio plays, and so on. And of course, the other equipment, I didn't even know about what you got here. I didn't know it was available, but the rest of it they shipped off to the Smithsonian years ago, and it's not on display as far as I know.
Bummer.
I mean, when Steve wanted to get information on his Empire State model, which is very rare, he went to the Smithsonian to see theirs. And I was talking to him when I made up my page on that set, and he said that they weren't the same. The set in the museum, which he got from Danny Gustafson, it was a Chicago collector. That set is not the same on the outside, because that's all that Steve had, was just a shell. But not the same on the outside as the complete set that's at the Smithsonian that came from University of Iowa.
Well, I'll just go.
I don't know if the scanner too. I'm not sure that they have the complete scanner at the Smithsonian. I've only seen part of it. I have not seen the photo cells, the photoelectric cells, and those were hand blown, by the way.
Oh,
those came from Turner.
Well, I'll just note that there's nothing wrong, speaking a little north of you, University of Minnesota, there's nothing wrong with attending an engineering school surrounded by cornfields. Good eating.
So I think since we're in kind of a free discussion here, getting off topic's not a problem. So while I've got James here, the lens disc and the Model 41 that's shown here is smaller overall diameter than that of the Visionette. That's probably the most common Western television set. Now, I've also encountered a lens disc of roughly the same diameter as the whole disc in a Visionette, and I have no idea what it came from. I obtained the disc, but I'm not sure what set it would have been. It's the triple interlaced, and I'm not aware of a large disc set that Western had.
I don't know that one. It might have been a one-off, or it could be a homemade set. In the Popular Science series from 1931 to 1932, it's also an excellent thing, along with the Kurtz book. George Waltz wrote that for Popular Science when George was a young man, and he goes all the way through the series of a 60. He's using a 60 line, the New York standard, New York and Pittsburgh standard, and he's the disc for that was 31 and a half inches across, and it could have been no smaller than about 27 by my calculations. But he eventually, to the end of that, he converts that to a lens disc, and it's the full-size disc. And I'm thinking, you could have made that so much smaller. And they show him looking at the screen, and he has no guard or cabinet between him and the scanning disc. He's inches away squinting at it, because a 60-line picture would be so much dimmer than, say, a 24-line or a 30-line. That's what you give up when you go to a higher resolution picture. You get the detail, but you lose the brightness. But anyway, that's an example of a full-size disc that has the lenses in there. So that could be a homemade one, especially if it doesn't have the striations that the larger Sanabria disc from the first model. You notice they strengthened the aluminum by putting striations around the inside of the disc to stiffen it up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And this one does. This one that's on the screen now doesn't have that. But I think it's because it's a smaller disc.
Yes, it's the Model 41 is smaller, and I don't recall on the other lens disc. I need to go look at it. I do believe, however, that it has some layout marks on it that would be consistent with the homemade, just leftover markings.
Well, that was the majority of sets, but they just didn't have the money, especially after the Great Depression. I mean, it's lucky that mechanical TV started in the hoopla of 1928 and not a few years later, because that might have totally squashed it. But people just they figured out ways of coping, and then if you only had to buy a few things, a few tubes, or if you could borrow them from radios, so much the better. Then you were down to just a few components that were television specific to make this mechanical scanner with. You could pull the radio out of something else, or the motor for the thing out of something else. You could use radio tubes for the resistance coupled amplifier. You use the speaker from the TV from the radio to tune in a TV signal and listen to it, make that buzzsaw sound that's so distinctively early television. And then you cut out the speaker. The speaker would have been a high impedance speaker, not a dynamic speaker. And then you'd have that usually the 71A tube on the output driving the neon tube. So there's a wonderful article about that too in Popular Mechanics in 1928. It's called "Here Is Your Television Receiver." It shows the Davin tri-standard set, which seemed like a great idea. 24, 36, and 48 lines all in one big huge disc, homemade, until a year or so later when out of Pittsburgh comes a 60-line system and blows the whole thing away.
Mm-hmm.
So 60 line is so good that you could actually see a baseball diamond if you took the diamond from the top, and you'd see the players, but they were only 1 pixel high. Pretty funny.
So on that picture that just showed, it looks like there's something like a light bulb. So is this the receiving or transmitting end?
That's the receiving end. That's the crater tube. Yeah, and that's very rare. Steve had a heck of a time finding the one for the museum.
Oh, so that's a weird bulb.
Yeah, it's like the old night lights before they had LEDs. They were those neon bulbs.
Oh, it's a neon.
It's a neon glow tube, but it's big. And
so the image appeared orangish then.
Oh yeah, that was a perfect color too, because most faces have a lot of orange in them. So if they're going to show, they were only able to show one or at most 2 people on a 60-line set. So you'd get the faces at least the right color. The background would be wrong. But most people are concerned about the facial color, as you know from color TV. So that was a perfect choice.
How did they modulate that tube output? There's a neon thing. That's fairly high voltage. How did they get it to get bright and dim in concert with the scanning?
Well, they had a regular resistance coupled amplifier, and then they just ran the tube with usually a current source, or sometimes they used an inductance or a resistance in series with the tube. But if you're going to use a current source, you don't need that. So that's how they would usually do it. And then they had to get a tube that would operate at that voltage. The original choice was a 71A, and it usually was a pretty bad choice. They also, if they wanted more power, they would put 2 of the tubes in parallel. That was quite common. And then they went from the 71A to a 45 and a 50, and a 10, where it was another common tube for the output. And then, of course, modern tubes later on. And the interesting thing about it is you can convert the receiver into a camera, and people were doing that. Sanabria even released kits for school. You just substitute put the photo tube where the glow tube was before, and then rewire the amplifier.
You could make.
I talked to Dave Johnson back in the day about doing it.
I mean, still, what do you mean pictures?
You could turn the TV receiver or monitor into a camera or into a scanner, more likely. The scanners, of course, were much more common because you get more light on the subject with a scanner.
So
then they eventually went to intermediate film.
Okay, yeah, that's what I mean. So the photosensitive material is what the image was scanned onto. Is that what you mean?
Well, if you're looking at the receiver, you aren't aware of the scanning disk. It's moving so fast, so you see a picture floating on top of the scanning disk. It doesn't. You're not aware that you're looking at a lamp. It seems like the image is floating on top of the scanning disk.
Gotcha.
And there was also a 3D version of that too, which actually were two different 3D versions that I can think of right off the bat.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
The history of engineering is fascinating, and that's what this is. Thank you.
Yeah, there was a question about the grayscale and the photocells, of course, were linear. And in the receiver, the neon tube, if it was driven by a current source, its output would be linear with respect to the current. So you could get a fairly accurate grayscale rendition. But then when CRTs came along, the electron gun in the CRT has a power law characteristic with a 2.6 power of the drive voltage, which would make, if the camera was still linear, it would make the pictures dark and contrasty. But the happy circumstance was that the iconoscope tube had pretty much the opposite nonlinearity of the CRT. So if you had a average scene, and broadly lit, so it wasn't spotlight contrast, you could get some very nice grayscale reproduction with an iconoscope camera and a CRT.
Gotcha. Okay, gotcha.
But the iconoscope had other problems that meant that situation was never going to be stable. For one thing, the iconoscope is inherently AC coupled. So there is no DC coupled signal out of an iconoscope camera. So if they had a high key scene where the scene was mostly bright with some darker elements, it would drift down towards gray. And on the other hand, if it was a dark scene with a few bright elements, it would drift up towards gray. And so you had a shader whose job was to constantly adjust the DC level. I believe also they tried things like clamping the darkest signal excursion to black. That might help, but not always. What if the scene doesn't have anything black in it? well, it would pull the brightness down towards black anyway.
Mhm. So
So-
early TV, yeah, I'm sorry.
So and the Iconoscope had the other problem of a secondary mission, which would create a hazy shading in different parts of the image, depending on which part of the image was brighter or darker. The electrons would get spread over to other parts of the image. So the shader had a multiple job. It was adjusting the brightness and also adjusting the brightness from edge to edge and top to bottom and center to edges. And so that term and that job description, shader, is carried down through the decades, and people, I don't know if they do today anymore now that cameras are so good and automatic that you have people who have no technical expertise producing videos. But the term shading was used for any kind of camera adjustment in broadcast stations for decades, even if it was something that really wasn't shading at all. It was setting the color balance before you go on the air or something like that. They would call it shading.
So consistent image quality wasn't so easy when electronic televisions first started, given what you said about shading.
That's right. The image dissector tubes are DC coupled because they're essentially a scanned photocell output. And but that means they're also linear, so they would require some nonlinear correction to get a decent looking picture on a CRT receiver.
So the advantage of the image dissector was you had the same photosensitive element with the image being scanned over it, as opposed to the other thing where you had an array of photosensitive elements that had to be scanned and could be different from each other in terms of neighborhood response. I mean, that's kind of, you got an array source versus a singular source in terms of brightness in the two approaches. So how well did image dissector cameras come out in this as opposed to an Iconoscope?
They were much less sensitive than the Iconoscope, which wasn't all that sensitive compared to an image orthicon. But the image dissector tube has no charge storage, so the finer you make the resolution, the poorer the sensitivity. Same problem as with a mechanical scanner.
Okay, thank you.
That sensitivity problem with both mechanical scanning and the images sector, that was one major reason for intermediate film, which I used to think was hilarious when I was at Iowa, but it was a wonderful system for adding sensitivity. And while AT&T took the credit for coming up with it because they came up with a theory, Jenkins had already been using it for years before that. And it was the beginning of film for television. You know, all the systems for reproducing film and slides on television. So very important development. But they also really came into its own in the 1936 Olympics in Berlin. So where they had a wonderful mobile van, which looked like real Rube Goldberg thing. Imagine a van with a movie camera on the top, 35 millimeter movie camera. And then instead of the film going out of the camera after being taken, it went down a long light insulated strip into the van off the motion picture camera. Inside the van was what amounts to a drugstore automatic processing system. And it processed the film. It dried it off slightly, but not completely. And then before it was dry, it ran it through a television mechanical scanner, which transmitted it to the studio and then to the audiences that were in viewing rooms around the city, because they didn't have individual sets in homes. And then after the scanner, the film went back up into the camera, into the take-up reel. Sometimes in between, it went through another bath that took the emulsion off the film and then put new emulsion back on the film so the camera could expose the film again. And that was the beginning of telecine, the way of reproducing film in television stations for many years. And of course, remember, they didn't have videotape in those years. So the television industry was a huge consumer of film. So film was very, very important. But that was the way that they did it with mechanical television, and not such a surprise. Only a few years later, they adopted Farnsworth's image dissector, and they replaced the mechanical scanner with the image dissector. And Farnsworth benefited because he had a cross-licensing agreement with Telefunken and with Baird, and so he could use the same thing. So when he put on his demonstration in Philadelphia, at the Franklin Institute, is what I'm thinking of. He was using intermediate film to get excellent pictures off the image dissector and the pictures that were more competitive with the Zworykin tube, with the Ike.
So there was a photography intermediate.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
They used it in England too. And in the US for that matter.
How long did that go on?
Well, it went on until they had videotape.
Really?
Yeah. I didn't realize it was around that long. I thought they abandoned that when television transitioned, but it really didn't. And then there was competition with the IO too. They came up with the Super Emitron in England, which was a tube that we had too, but we couldn't exploit it here because of the Farnsworth versus RCA patent disputes. But in England, they could use it, and in Germany, because Helen, I think it was Dietzigen and Hell, if I remember right, had invented a previous image dissector in Europe before Farnsworth, and they had those patents. So they were able to use this tube that combined Farnsworth with the Iconoscope and use photomultipliers to amplify the signal, which was Farnsworth's attempt at answering the extra sensitivity in the Iconoscope. He never equaled it, but it certainly improved it. So the next idea was, why don't we combine the two? But as I say, RCA stalled that by this patent war. So Europe had it, we didn't for a few years.
Thank you. I'll be quiet. Well, okay, so what? All right. So the advent of videotape sort of equalized all of this?
Well, it was an improvement over the whole thing. Especially, I'm talking about the Ampex system, not about the RCA system.
Right. Yeah.
By the way, Richard Dean is displaying a mechanical scanner with an image on it. You can see it on it. R.L. Dean. It's beautiful. The image is not consistently phased, but it's a nice image.
Yeah, it's the letter R is all it is. It's not quite syncing correctly.
Yeah.
But you can see the orange color.
Yeah.
Yeah. So videotape. What a difference it made, and of course it was much cheaper to use that the equipment wasn't cheap, but the videotape was cheaper than film, the way I understand it. I mean, they were using tremendous amounts of film in television, more than Hollywood.
Oh, okay. So the videotape really enabled this transition from more expensive film than is silver halide to magnetic domains in the videotape, and to get a good.
Yeah,
that's what happened.
Yeah, quad. Yeah, the
Yeah.
2-inch videotape.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Thank you. So
Yeah.
prior to that, they were gobbling up movie film.
That's right, and that's why television switched from 35 millimeter to 16 millimeter. And England, for a while, switched to 17.5 millimeter. They wanted to buy the 35 millimeter film and slit it down the middle, but it was still nitrate film.
Yeah.
Heaven forbid. They had so many other things that were going wrong with their crazy system. The intermediate film cameras that they used in the Baird studio, they looked, from the pictures, they looked to be about 20 feet long. And so they couldn't move the cameras. They were up against EMI electronic cameras that could move around the studio on dollies. It's amazing to me that people would think that the two systems were equal. They weren't. I mean, you're getting propaganda when you hear that, in my opinion. But you know, to pan across the subject, they had a moving lens on the front of it. And then the intermediate film that they were using to go through the processing bath, they were using horrible chemicals like cyanide and stuff like that occasionally leaked on the floor. And they had high voltage and all sorts of crazy stuff going at once. And in the booth, they were still using a mechanical scanner. It was a 60 line scanner with 4 spirals, so they would get up to 240 lines out of it. But that was all. There was the minimum standard that the commission required for competing, and the system was a medium definition system, and they were up against a high definition system from EMI, 441 lines, or 405 lines. I'm sorry, and which would have been almost 4 times the resolution, vertical and horizontal. So it's hard for me to imagine calling them the same or somehow competitive. The thing that was better about the Baird system, or maybe competitive, was the film scanning. That was their forte. And they also had the Farnsworth system, but right in the middle of the contest in 1936 and 1937, their main studio burned at the Crystal Palace, burned, and that was a horrible fire. And even though it was a mostly glass structure, it destroyed a lot of their equipment, and the middle part of the structure was gone. That's probably more than you need to know.
No, it's not. Thank you.
One thing to note about the progression of experiments and having a intermediate stage where in the lab they were doing mechanical scanning and CRT reproduction is that Zworykin wrote his Iconoscope patents before they could successfully make one that worked. And they spent a lot of hair pulling trying to get workable mosaic for the image plate. And they propose things like having hexagonal plugs of photosensitive material with a insulating coating, so they could have all these discrete elements next to each other on the plate without shorting out. And what they finally came up with was a mica insulating plate with microscopic globules of silver cesium to be the sensors, but the plate in an iconoscope kind of looks like emery paper because it's got that rough surface composed of little globules of photosensor material, which when the process was done properly, it would bead up into microscopic beads the way water beads up on glass. And that's how they got a surface that had many insulated elements that wouldn't just short each other out.
So they were dimensionally uniform, these photosensitive domains thus created.
They were random sizes, but if you look in the old TV engineering books, they will have a photomicrograph of a iconoscope plate. And but the point is, they were much smaller than the size of the scanning beam. They were like I can't remember. If it's 1/100th of the diameter. I think it's 100th of the area, so 1/10 the diameter of the scanning beam. So that would be a source of some fixed pattern noise, but it was so fine that it was not a problem.
So they basically averaged over variability in those photosensitive domain sizes.
Right.
Got it. Okay, thanks. Thank you.
I heard that, I don't know the whole story, but I heard that they actually improved the way that the inside of the iconoscope worked with through an error. And when in the oven, they cooked it a little bit too long. And I guess some of those silver cesium dots must have melted a little bit larger than normal, but not enough to spoil the image. I don't know if that's an apocryphal story or if that's true, but
I've heard the same story, and reading between the lines, my thought is that until they made that mistake, they had a problem that the dots were not separating completely. So you would have a useless plate because the dots would short out to each other.
Huh. I wonder what the advantage was. It must have been someplace in between. Like, what a lucky mistake, because if it made it better, it would have had to been a miracle that it mostly worked. Well, my battery is running low, so I'm going to have to say good night. Bye, folks.
Good night. Well, I'm in the California, Arizona time zone, so I could hang around. But I imagine other people out to the east are getting tired. So if there's no more discussion, I think I'll say good night too.
Anybody alive? Hello?
Yeah, sounds like everybody's running down.
Okay, guess it's time I say something that ow. Ow. Sorry about that. Oh. Do you guys want to see my favorite TV that I have?
Sure.
Okay. Sorry, my phone is charging. I gotta see if it'll reach. Yeah, I gotta turn on my light. There we go. This one. It is a 1990 Magnavox. It just looks very nice. There we go. There's your RF interference for you. Yeah, anyway, that's my favorite TV.
Company with a long history, Magnavox.
And then there, I think it was like in the 70s or something when they like merged with Philips, right?
Yeah, that I don't recall. Certainly remember some of their early radio equipment and amplifiers, dating back to the 20s.
I have I think I have two Magnavox TVs in total. Oh God. One is from 1990, which is the one you just saw, and one is from 1978, which is one that I actually got at the early television convention. I won it in the auction.
Mm-hmm.
It's a nice set, but the one of the like tuning knobs is a bit loose and it's fallen out a few times. I mean, it's easy enough to get back in. It's just a little bit irritating. So it's not that bad. I still like it.
Yeah, as restoration projects go, that doesn't sound like too bad a one to tackle.
Yeah. I mean, otherwise it works completely fine. I actually only have, I think I only have like one TV that is completely dead. Well, it's not completely dead, but it's like not functional enough to like turn on and stuff. It's a GE from I think early 90s. I made the mistake of ordering a CRT from eBay, which, you know, you're not supposed to ship CRTs, so that was a mistake. I mean, I've gotten lucky with shipping them a few times, but this time I just didn't. Like I had a Trinitron shipped to me. I'm not sure from where. I think, yeah, I don't quite remember what like state it was from or anything, but I had it shipped to me and it actually arrived and didn't get broken in the process. So that was lucky, but I mean, you got the GE did get broken. I think what happened, I'm not 100% sure, but I believe what happened is one of the connectors near the flyback got knocked loose during shipping, and then I think when I turned it on, after it like arrived, something got fried. Because I opened it up a bit later and it was arcing, so yeah, that was rough. I still have not fixed it because I'm not totally sure what I need to replace. I mean, if I can find out what I need to replace and if it's something like that isn't too difficult, I will do it, but I might just give up and try and sell it possibly.
Yeah, conceivable if connector pulled loose and there was something running without a load on it that
Yeah.
might have caused damage.
Yeah, it's still arcing. I don't keep it plugged in for obvious reasons.
Yes.
But
yeah.
yeah, I have some videos of it arcing. And I have another TV that arcs. The GE isn't nearly as bad as that one, but it's still pretty bad.
Well, tell you, I think I'm going to call it a night also. Presume Dave is still standing by to do the honors of closing down meeting, but I'm going to have to skedaddle. So it's a pleasure talking with you, well, with everyone this evening. So
yeah. Anyone else still there?
I think we're going to shut it down.
All right.